I stood at the bottom of the marble steps, the night air cool against my skin as the double doors slammed shut in my face. Behind the glass, crystal chandeliers sparkled and laughter rose above the thrum of bass, but none of it was meant for me. My son's voice carried sharp and clear through the noise. Your mother's not invited, my son. The child I raised, the boy whose scraped knees I once kissed, whose future I built with my own 2 hands. And now, in front of strangers and flashing lights, I was nothing but an uninvited guest. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The valet stand gleamed under chandeliers strung across the driveway, their golden light spilling across a line of exotic cars. Rolls-Royces, Ferraris, Bentleys. Each machine glittered like jewelry polished for the occasion. Eleanor stepped out of her own understated town car, the quiet purr of the engine shutting off behind her. She adjusted the cuff of her silk jacket, her posture straight, her silver hair swept into a low chignon that gave her an air of dignified command. The double doors ahead pulsed with the low thrum of bass, glass panes flashing with strobes from the nightclub-style interior. Her son's celebration could be heard before it was seen. Laughter, clinking glasses, a DJ's voice hyping the crowd. Eleanor walked forward, heels sharp against the marble steps, until a wall of black-clad security intercepted her. "Evening, ma'am," one of them said, his earpiece catching the light. He held out a hand, palm raised. "Name on the guest list." "Eleanor Harper," she answered evenly, her voice carrying the weight of authority that once made boardrooms fall silent. The guard scanned his tablet, his brows knitting. Then he glanced over his shoulder as though awaiting direction. Through the glass, Eleanor spotted Dylan, her son, her only child, his tall frame draped in a designer suit. He held a glass of champagne, Sophie glued to his arm in a gown that looked deliberately chosen to outshine every other woman there. Dylan noticed her. Recognition flickered, but no warmth followed. Instead, he raised his hand, not in greeting, but in dismissal. He leaned toward the door, his voice sharp enough to slice through the music. "Your mother's not invited." The words struck with the precision of a knife. Eleanor stood still, the hum of laughter behind him swelling as if the entire party had joined in on the cruelty. Dylan's eyes, once soft with boyish charm, were now shards of ice, unblinking, unapologetic. Sophie leaned in, whispering something before tilting her chin toward Eleanor. Her lips curled into a smirk, the kind designed not for humor but for dominance. The guard stepped back, closing the door with a muffled thud that cut Eleanor off from the glittering chaos inside. The final glimpse she had of her son was the champagne glass he raised. Whether in toast or mockery, she could not tell. Outside, the night air pressed cool against her skin. The faint scent of gardenias, mixing with exhaust fumes from the valet line. For a brief moment, Eleanor remained still at the foot of the steps. Any other woman might have wilted under such humiliation. But she adjusted her pearl earring with steady fingers, exhaling once as if shedding decades of disappointment in a single breath. The party raged on behind her, muffled now by walls, the bass line nothing more than a dull tremor under her shoes. Eleanor turned toward the street. Her driver moved to open the car door, but she gestured for him to wait. Instead, she stood under the string lights arching across the driveway, letting their brilliance wash over her like a cruel spotlight. Then, almost imperceptibly, her lips curved, not into sorrow, but into a smile so deliberate it seemed carved from stone. "Ma'am?" the driver asked softly, unsure. Eleanor shook her head, pulling her phone from her clutch. Her reflection in the black screen stared back at her, every line of her face speaking not of fragility, but of resolve earned through years of endurance. Her thumb scrolled with practiced precision until it landed on the number she wanted. The ring buzzed once, twice. On the third, a familiar voice answered, low and measured. "Eleanor?" She didn't waste time with greetings. Her eyes lifted back toward the mansion, where light spilled from every window as though the world inside believed itself untouchable. Her smile sharpened into something far more dangerous than bitterness. "It's time," Eleanor said, her voice steady as steel. "Update the will." Morning light spilled across the city skyline, bouncing off glass towers as Eleanor's driver pulled into the underground garage of a downtown high-rise. The building had the polished sterility of wealth. Clean stone walls, polished chrome railings, and the faint scent of lemon polish clinging to every corner. Eleanor stepped out, silk scarf floating behind her like a banner of quiet defiance. She was led to the 12th floor, where Robert Daniels' office overlooked the bustling arteries of Los Angeles. Inside, the space smelled of leather and cedar, the kind of room designed to steady nerves and close deals. Robert, lean and sharp in a navy suit, stood from his desk the moment she entered. His eyes softened with recognition, though his expression carried the seriousness of a man who knew what kind of conversation this would be. "Eleanor," he greeted, extending his hand. "You don't make appointments lightly." "Nor do you, Robert," she replied, sliding a sealed envelope across his desk. Her hand didn't tremble. It moved with the certainty of someone who had decided long ago. Robert slit the envelope open, the crisp tear echoing in the quiet office. He unfolded the papers, scanning line by line with the meticulousness that had made him the lawyer no one dared to underestimate. His brow rose slightly as he reached the middle, then the end. When he looked up, there was both respect and caution in his gaze. "You're sure about this?" His tone was calm but weighted, as though reminding her that once ink dried, there would be no undoing. Eleanor sat back in the leather chair, the city's hum audible through the glass behind her. "I've been sure for years," she said coolly. "Dylan won't get a penny." Robert's pen tapped once against the desk before he set it aside. Then it settled. He scribbled notes in the margin, initials here, signatures there. With every mark, Dylan's grasp on her legacy dissolved. "Jessica Hayes will be the executor," he confirmed, nodding to the clause Eleanor had insisted on. "Trustworthy, loyal, unlike him." Eleanor's eyes flickered with quiet satisfaction. Jessica had proven herself more family than her son ever had. Dedicated, discreet, unwavering. The kind of person Eleanor could trust to carry out her wishes when she no longer could. "It's airtight," Robert said finally, sliding the file back into its folder. "No loopholes, no back doors. If Dylan tries to contest this, he'll be throwing money into a furnace." Eleanor let the silence hang for a beat, savoring the gravity of the moment. The air smelled faintly of paper ink and polished wood, grounding her in the present. She rose, crossing to the window, her heels whispering against the rug. From here, she could see the sprawl of the city, cars streaming like veins, endless towers scraping at the horizon. For decades she had built, worked, sacrificed. Now, with one decision, she had ensured Dylan would inherit nothing of it. Robert watched her carefully. "You know he'll fight this, Eleanor. He won't just roll over." Her reflection in the glass stared back, silver hair gleaming like armor. "Then let him fight," she said. "He'll only exhaust himself." Robert leaned back, a thin smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. He had seen ruthless men in courtrooms, but Eleanor's calm cut deeper than fury ever could. As the office quieted again, Eleanor lifted her chin toward the skyline. She imagined Dylan in his borrowed world of flashing lights and shallow toasts, certain of his place at the center. He had no idea the ground beneath him had already been pulled away. Her voice, when it came, was low but resonant, the kind that could turn a room to stone. "It's time for him to realize who's really in charge." The vibration of her phone cut through the quiet of her study. The heavy curtains muffled the noise from the street outside, leaving only the faint tick of the grandfather clock and the rustle of papers spread across her desk. Eleanor reached for the phone, her expression unreadable as Dylan's name lit the screen. The message was short, almost casual. "Why weren't you at the party?" "Perfect." She typed back with fingers steady, her reply as sharp as a blade slipped between the ribs. "Not my scene anymore." It didn't take long for Sophie to insert herself. Another text pinged in, her tone dripping with cruelty even through the cold glow of the letters. "Relic from another time." Maybe that's why Dylan didn't bother with an invite. Eleanor's lips curved in the faintest trace of a smile, but it carried no warmth. The phone buzzed again, this time with a call. Dylan's name, his persistence clung to the screen like a stain. She let it ring once, twice, 5 times before the silence returned. Then it rang again. Finally, she flipped the phone over, face down on the desk, silencing him. The wood beneath her fingers felt solid, grounding her against the storm of entitlement trying to claw its way in. Across the room, Jessica Hayes stepped inside quietly, a tray of chamomile tea in hand. She set it on the table, the steam curling upward, filling the study with its calm fragrance. "He's not going to stop calling," Jessica murmured, her eyes glancing toward the buzzing phone. "I know." Eleanor didn't look up from the documents Robert had finalized for her earlier that morning. The legal language was dense, but she had read each line enough times that the words carved themselves into her mind. Jessica hesitated, then asked, "Do you want me to draft a reply? Something formal? I can word it so he'll know you mean business." Eleanor shook her head slowly, her pearl earrings catching the lamplight. "No, he doesn't deserve my words." The phone vibrated once more before falling silent at last. Eleanor exhaled, long and measured, as though she'd been waiting years for this quiet to arrive. She lifted her teacup, the ceramic warm against her palm, and let the taste wash over her tongue. Floral, soothing, the kind of flavor that reminded her she was still the one in control of her own house, her own life, her own legacy. Jessica studied her for a moment, recognizing the resolve in Eleanor's expression. "You're really doing it, aren't you?" "I already have," Eleanor replied, setting the cup down with deliberate precision. Outside, the wind shifted, rattling the branches against the windows. The house itself seemed to settle, as though in agreement with her decision. Eleanor rose from her chair, the hem of her silk blouse whispering against her slacks as she moved to the mahogany desk. She opened the top drawer, its hinges creaking faintly, and withdrew the folder Robert had placed in her hands that morning. The papers inside felt heavier than they should have been, thick with the weight of finality. Dylan's name, once stitched across every plan and future, was now absent. In its place stood Jessica's, the executor who would carry forward Eleanor's intentions with loyalty and steadiness. Her hand lingered on the signature page, tracing her own name with the tip of one finger. The ink had long dried, but the choice was alive, thrumming through her veins with each heartbeat. Behind her, Jessica spoke again, softer this time, almost reverent. "Do you feel lighter?" Eleanor didn't answer. Instead, she looked at the folder one last time, her gaze clear, unshaken. She slid it back into the drawer, the wood closing with a decisive click that echoed louder than any phone call, any insult, any party she'd been excluded from. The room settled into silence once more, but the decision was no longer waiting to be made. It was already finished. And with that final movement, Eleanor Harper had shut a door Dylan would never open again. Champagne sprayed across the dance floor like liquid gold as Dylan Harper laughed at the center of it all. The nightclub pulsed with energy, bass heavy enough to shake the glass, strobes painting everything in violent bursts of color. Dylan, suit jacket discarded, leaned back with his arms wide as though the room itself revolved around him. Sophie clung to his side, camera flashes from her phone cutting through the haze as she posed against his shoulder. The party smelled of spilled liquor and expensive perfume, the air sticky with sweat and self-indulgence. Dylan didn't notice or didn't care that his phone kept buzzing on the bar. He ignored it, pouring another shot, sliding it across the counter for Sophie. To him, the night was endless. The applause eternal. But miles away, Eleanor Harper sat in the garden of her Beverly Hills estate. The world around her was hushed, the opposite of Dylan's chaos. Cicadas hummed in the hedges. The faint trickle of her fountain mingled with the rustle of the evening breeze. A porcelain teacup rested in her hand, its steam drifting lazily into the night air. She sipped slowly, eyes steady on the roses she had planted years ago, each one trimmed and blooming under her careful hand. Her calm was not the absence of storm, but the eye of it. Every sip reminded her that control no longer belonged to Dylan. The papers were signed. The ink sealed his fate, and the legacy he assumed was his had already slipped like sand through his fingers. Inside the nightclub, Sophie leaned in close, her voice low but sharp enough to pierce Dylan's drunken haze. "She'll cave. She always does. Your mother thrives on drama, but she doesn't have the guts to cut you out completely." Dylan chuckled, but there was hesitation in his eyes. "You don't know her like I do." "Exactly," Sophie pressed, her manicured hand gripping his arm. She'll fold. Just wait. For the first time that evening, Dylan's smile faltered. He drowned the doubt in another drink, tilting his head back as though arrogance alone could keep the ground steady beneath him. Back at the estate, Eleanor's phone lit up on the wrought iron table beside her. Robert Daniels' name flashed across the screen. She answered without hurry, her voice calm as ever. "It's done," Robert said, the sound of papers rustling faintly on his end. "Filed. Recorded. No contest will undo this. The will is ironclad." Eleanor let her gaze wander across the dark sky, the stars scattered like diamonds against velvet. "Good. Let him think he still has power." "Eleanor," Robert added, his tone carrying a note of respect. "I've seen a lot of families tear each other apart over less, but this is decisive." "I don't do half measures," she replied simply, then ended the call. Hours later, Dylan slouched against the club's balcony railing, phone finally in his hand. He snapped a photo of himself and Sophie, champagne bottle lifted high above his head, city lights burning beneath them. He typed the caption with smug fingers, "Family always has your back." He hit post before finishing the bottle in a single arrogant gulp. The image spread instantly, his followers eating up the show of wealth, the bravado, the claim of loyalty. He smirked as the likes poured in, convinced he had the last word. But in Eleanor's study, Jessica Hayes leaned over Eleanor's shoulder, holding her own phone. "Have you seen this?" she asked, tilting the screen to reveal Dylan's post. His grin, Sophie's pose, the shallow caption. Eleanor's eyes lingered on the photo, her face unreadable in the soft lamp glow. The silence stretched long enough that Jessica shifted nervously, unsure whether to speak again. Finally, she asked, "Should I respond? Maybe make a statement, something that—" Eleanor's lips curved, a smile so faint it seemed carved from stone. She reached out, sliding the drawer closed where the will rested. Her decision already binding. "No," she said quietly, voice laced with steel. "It's already done." The party was over, though the champagne hangover still clung to Dylan's skin like sweat. He sprawled across the velvet couch in his living room, shirt half open, the blinds drawn against the blinding California sun. Sophie paced with her phone in hand, her heels clicking angrily against the marble floor. "That woman is out of control," Sophie snapped, scrolling through social media. "Do you realize how humiliating it was? People noticed she wasn't there, Dylan. They asked questions. And your mother couldn't be bothered to show up." Dylan rubbed his temples pounding. "She's always been dramatic. She'll come around once she cools off. She knows the house, the estate. It's all meant to come to me. She's bluffing." Sophie whirled on him, her diamond earrings catching the morning light. "Bluffing? Do you have any idea how petty she is? She thrives on control, and you just handed her a reason to make us look weak. We cannot afford weakness right now." Her words sliced deeper than Dylan cared to admit. For the first time in years, a thread of doubt tugged at him. He sat forward, running a hand through his unkempt hair, trying to bury the unease under a plan. "I'll fix it. I'll apologize. She'll forgive me, she always does." But miles away, Robert Daniels wasn't planning forgiveness. Inside his office, he laid out thick folders across the table. The will, the addendums, the notarized filings, all of it stacked with precise order. Jessica Hayes stood nearby, her expression tense, eyes darting between the lawyer and Eleanor. "They still believe everything is theirs," Robert said, his voice cutting through the silence. "The house, the antiques, even the staff. Dylan and Sophie are clinging to a fantasy. When they see this letter, it won't just be a wake-up call, it'll be a demolition." Jessica folded her arms, leaning slightly closer to Eleanor, who sat perfectly still, her face unreadable. "Do you think he'll fight it?" she asked. "Oh, he'll fight," Robert said, with a bitter smile. "But he'll lose." Eleanor finally spoke, her tone cool as winter air. "Send it." That evening, Dylan's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, expecting another PR contact or a sycophantic friend. Instead, the message preview froze him. From Eleanor Harper. He opened it quickly. The words were brief, but they chilled more than any tirade could have. "No more chances. You'll get what you deserve." Dylan cursed under his breath, hurling the phone onto the couch. Sophie, alarmed by the sudden shift in his expression, picked it up and read the message herself. Her manicured hand trembled, not from fear, but from the dawning realization that this wasn't the empty threat she'd dismissed. The next morning, a courier arrived at their doorstep. The envelope was thick, official, stamped with Robert Daniels' insignia. Dylan tore it open, the seal cracking under his impatient fingers. The pages unfolded slowly, each line dragging his stomach lower, his pulse faster. Sophie hovered, desperate. What does it say? He read silently at first, scanning legal jargon that meant little to him but everything to his future. His hands grew damp against the paper. The words hit him harder with each line. Beneficiary removed. Executor reassigned. Assets reallocated. Finally, his eyes landed on the final clause. The sentence glared back at him, stark in its simplicity. Effective immediately, you are disinherited. The color drained from Dylan's face. The arrogance, the bravado, the smugness that had carried him through the party evaporated in an instant. His chest tightened, breath shallow as though the very air had turned against him. Sophie reached for the letter, but he clutched it with shaking fingers, staring at the words again and again, hoping they might change if he read them one more time. They didn't. The empire he thought was unshakable had been ripped away in silence, behind closed doors, with a pen stroke he never saw coming. And Eleanor had made sure he would never forget the cost. Dylan's hand shook as he slammed his phone onto the kitchen counter. The disinheritance letter still spread across the marble like a curse he couldn't fold away. Sophie hovered beside him, pacing with the nervous energy of someone who had just realized the ground beneath her stilettos was collapsing. The air smelled faintly of espresso gone cold, bitter and uninviting, a mirror of their morning mood. Call him, Sophie demanded, her voice thin with panic. Call Robert. This has to be some kind of mistake. Dylan snatched up the phone, dialing with furious precision. Each ring stabbed at his chest until finally, Robert's smooth, deliberate voice filled the line. Daniels. This is Dylan Harper, Dylan barked, his tone sharp enough to cut. You've made an error. My mother's will. No error, Robert interrupted, his words clipped but steady. You've lost everything. The silence that followed was suffocating. Sophie's eyes widened, her hand pressing to her throat as though trying to keep her composure from spilling out. She lunged toward the speakerphone button. Mr. Daniels, she pleaded, her voice shaking. This isn't fair. Eleanor's not herself. Robert cut in before she could finish. She was very much herself when she signed the papers. The decision stands. It's final. Sophie gripped the edge of the counter, nails tapping against the stone like frantic Morse code. Please, you don't understand what this does to us. I understand perfectly, Robert said, his tone like iron. It's over. The decision's been made. Dylan clenched his jaw, pacing now, chest heaving with the fury of a man unaccustomed to denial. He forced a chuckle, thin and unconvincing. Look, Robert, let's be reasonable. There's always a middle ground. My mother may think she's teaching me a lesson, but compromise keeps families together. You help me out here, and I'll make sure you're remembered for it. Robert's voice remained unshaken. I don't deal in bribes, Mr. Harper. And this isn't about compromise. It's about respect. Something you squandered. The line clicked. Silence again, this time absolute. Sophie's hand flew to her hair, tugging at the perfect waves as if unraveling herself. What do we do now? He made it sound sealed, like there's no undoing it. Dylan's teeth ground audibly. Nobody cuts me out. Not her, not anyone. His eyes flashed with the kind of rage that came not from grief, but from entitlement denied. Miles away, Eleanor sat on her white-painted front porch, the late afternoon sunlight slanting across her roses. The wooden boards beneath her chair were warm, her teacup cool now from being left too long. From her seat she could hear children laughing faintly in the distance, the faint hum of traffic rolling through Beverly Hills' manicured streets. Her phone sat face up on the wicker table, still from the silence after Robert's call. She didn't pick it up. She didn't need to. Every frantic attempt Dylan made to claw back what he'd lost only confirmed the correctness of her choice. Jessica appeared at the doorway, holding a small stack of freshly sorted mail. Anything urgent? She asked softly. Eleanor shook her head, her gaze still on the garden. Nothing worth my time. The wind shifted, carrying the faint perfume of jasmine across the porch. Eleanor closed her eyes, letting it wash over her. For the first time in decades, the weight of her son's demands wasn't pressing against her shoulders. Back at Dylan's home, Sophie watched him pace like a caged animal. The house was silent except for the sound of his heavy steps and the occasional frustrated hiss under his breath. He picked up his phone again, thumbs stabbing at the screen with reckless force. The message was short, seething, designed to wound as much as warn. "I'll get back what's mine. You haven't seen the last of me." The courtroom smelled faintly of polished wood and stale coffee, the air thick with anticipation. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting an unforgiving brightness on every strained face. Dylan sat at the plaintiff's table, his suit pressed to perfection, though sweat glistened at his temples. Sophie clutched his arm like a lifeline, her nails digging crescents into his sleeve. Across the aisle, Eleanor sat with regal stillness beside Robert Daniels. Her pearl earrings caught the light, her back straight against the leather chair. Where Dylan fidgeted and Sophie whispered frantically, Eleanor remained unmoved, eyes fixed forward, as if the entire proceeding was nothing more than a formality. The judge entered, robes swishing, gavel striking once against the sound block. "Court is now in session." Dylan's lawyer, a sharp-tongued man with slicked-back hair, rose to address the bench. "Your Honor, this is a case of undue influence. My client believes his mother was coerced into altering her will. At 70 years of age, Mrs. Harper cannot be expected to make such drastic decisions without manipulation." Sophie nodded emphatically, her voice carrying from behind the table. "She's not the same as she used to be. She forgets things. She gets confused." Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line, but she said nothing. Robert rose slowly, his presence commanding without theatrics. "Your Honor, with respect, this is fiction. Mrs. Harper is of sound mind. She was deliberate in every choice. We have medical evaluations to confirm her cognitive health and testimony from professionals who have interacted with her extensively." He placed a folder on the bench. The judge flipped through the documents, his brow lifting slightly as he scanned the reports. Eleanor caught Dylan's gaze across the aisle, holding it just long enough to remind him that silence could be sharper than words. Dylan's lawyer tried again, circling the prey. "Mr. Daniels is her longtime legal counsel, correct? Isn't it possible he manipulated her into this decision to benefit others?" Robert's expression didn't flicker. "I acted on Mrs. Harper's direct instructions, all documented, all signed. Every step witnessed and notarized. Nothing was hidden, nothing coerced." The judge's eyes narrowed. "Do you have evidence to the contrary?" Dylan's lawyer shuffled his papers, but the pages sounded thin, empty of weight. He cleared his throat, pushing forward with bravado. "We believe Mr. Daniels has positioned himself as the gatekeeper of Mrs. Harper's fortune." Robert leaned forward slightly, his voice steady and cutting. "I have no stake in her assets. My role is legal, nothing more. The only people here with a financial interest are sitting at that table." A ripple of murmurs spread through the courtroom. Sophie's face reddened, and Dylan shifted uncomfortably, his confident mask cracking at the edges. The judge raised his hand, silencing the whispers. He glanced again at the folder Robert had presented, then leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "I'll need a recess to review these filings thoroughly." The gavel struck once more. "Court will resume this afternoon." The room erupted into a low hum as people shuffled toward the doors. Dylan turned to Sophie, his jaw tight, whispering harshly. "He's lying. He has to be lying. She wouldn't just—" Sophie's voice cracked. "But what if she really did?" Eleanor stood gracefully, Robert gathering the papers at her side. She didn't glance back at Dylan, didn't acknowledge the venom in his glare. Instead, she let the sound of her heels carry her toward the exit, each step a reminder that control was hers. Minutes later, as everyone reconvened, the judge re-entered, expression unreadable. He adjusted his glasses, eyes moving deliberately across the courtroom before resting on Eleanor, then Dylan. "I'll issue a ruling in 24 hours. Dylan Harper sat in his penthouse living room, blinds drawn against the harsh afternoon sun. The space smelled of stale whiskey and yesterday's cologne, the party's aftertaste still clinging to the air. He paced the length of the marble floor, shoes clicking with each restless step. Sophie perched on the edge of the couch, her phone clutched like a weapon, nails tapping nervously against the glass screen. 24 hours, Dylan muttered, dragging a hand through his hair. The judge will see reason. He has to. Sophie didn't answer. Her eyes flickered across the endless stream of comments online, some sympathetic, many mocking. The world was watching, and she hated that they looked powerless. We can't just sit here, she said sharply. We need to act. Miles away, Eleanor was the picture of calm. She sat in her sunlit garden, the scent of blooming jasmine thick in the air, a soft breeze stirring the leaves. A pitcher of iced tea glistened on the wrought iron table beside her, condensation sliding down the glass. Unlike her son, she wasn't pacing. She wasn't waiting for mercy from a judge. She was savoring the quiet hum of bees moving lazily among the roses. Her phone chimed once. Robert Daniels. She answered without rush, her tone steady. Updates. The judge will deliver his ruling tomorrow, Robert replied. His voice was steady, but Eleanor could detect the faint tension underneath. An attorney's instinct to anticipate every scenario. They'll try everything between now and then. Emotional pleas, media stunts, maybe even fabricated claims. Eleanor stirred her tea, the ice clinking against the glass. Let them, she said coolly. Robert paused, then chuckled softly. I should have known you'd say that. Back in the penthouse, Sophie had already set a plan in motion. She and Dylan sat across from a sleek conference table, surrounded by a PR team dressed in sharp suits and armed with laptops. The room smelled of burnt coffee and overworked ambition. Screens glowed with charts and drafted statements. We need to get ahead of the story, Sophie urged. Her voice was tight, but her posture screamed desperation. Eleanor is making him look like an abandoned son. We spin it. Make her look like the manipulative villain. One of the consultants adjusted his glasses, typing quickly. We can push a narrative about age. Suggest she's out of touch, vulnerable, maybe even unstable. Sympathy sells. Dylan leaned forward, seizing on it. Exactly. Paint me as the loyal son. I gave her everything and she, what? Tossed me aside because of a grudge? The consultant hesitated. Problem is, the filings we've seen are airtight. Medical evaluations confirm her competence. Everything was documented meticulously. Sophie snapped. Then make it work. That's what we're paying you for. The team shifted uncomfortably, exchanging quick glances. A woman at the end of the table spoke finally, her tone measured but firm. There's no traction here. You can't build a narrative. On quicksand. Every route we've tried circles back to one fact. Your mother's will is unbreakable, and the more you push, the more the public sees desperation. The silence that followed was suffocating. Dylan's jaw tightened, fists clenching against the table. Sophie's phone buzzed with another notification, the glow of the screen reflecting her panic. You're telling me, Dylan said slowly, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, that there's nothing you can do? The lead consultant folded his laptop shut with finality. The sound echoed through the sterile room like a gavel strike. That's exactly what we're telling you. The will is too airtight. The phone buzzed relentlessly in Dylan's hand as he scrolled through the latest updates. Every post, every tweet, every article. Each one twisted the knife deeper. Sophie sat beside him, her face pinched with frustration as they plotted their next move. They had already tried to manipulate the courts. Now it was time to fight back in the only place where they still had power, the internet. Dylan clicked on his Instagram app, fingers trembling with a mixture of anger and determination. The screen flickered as he began typing. Eleanor Harper, once a brilliant businesswoman, now a bitter, irrational old woman who's completely lost touch with reality. Her actions are the result of her age, nothing more. It's time for the world to see the truth about who she really is. He hit post. Sophie watched over his shoulder, nodding in approval. We have to show people she's been difficult for years, that she's always been impossible. If we control the narrative now, we'll own this. Dylan's thumb hovered over the keyboard again. Then he scrolled through a few more photos, choosing a particularly unflattering one of Eleanor at a family gathering. He attached the image, his jaw tightening as he typed another caption. This is the woman who once claimed to care about family. What a farce. They both watched as the likes and comments started rolling in. Their followers, many of whom only knew the Harper family from their glossy social media presence, jumped at the chance to join the conversation. Some sympathized, others ridiculed. But it didn't matter. This was the beginning of their war. Hundreds of miles away, in the quiet of her Beverly Hills home, Eleanor sat still as a statue, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. The scent of lavender drifted through the open window, mingling with the distant sounds of traffic. She knew something was coming. She didn't need to check her phone to feel the weight of it. She could already hear the buzz of the media, the hushed conversations, the whispers growing louder. And then, Jessica called. "Eleanor," she said, voice tight. "They're attacking you online. The posts, the things they're saying, it's all over the place." Eleanor's fingers stilled, and she looked out across the rose garden in front of her. The quiet peace around her felt almost like a reflection of the calm she maintained inside. "Let them talk, Jessica," she said softly, a trace of amusement in her voice. "It only makes their downfall inevitable." The silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes. Jessica, loyal as ever, knew her role now. Stand by Eleanor. But Eleanor's words, her calm certainty, allowed Jessica to breathe again. Sophie and Dylan's plan was already backfiring. The more they lashed out, the more they revealed themselves to be the entitled, spoiled figures they were. It wasn't long before the first wave of supportive posts began to appear on Eleanor's social media. Family, friends, longtime colleagues, even strangers who had seen her work over the years, flooded the platforms with messages of support. One post read, "Eleanor Harper built her empire with grace and intelligence. What's happening now is cruel and unjust. The real story will come out." Another, "Shame on them for attacking someone who gave them everything. Eleanor's legacy is untouchable." Even some of her more private friends, those who'd watched from the sidelines, began to stand up, sharing their own stories of how Eleanor had been nothing but fair, nothing but fierce in her determination to keep her family whole, until her son's arrogance pushed her to the edge. Robert called, his voice calm but urgent. "You're going to hear more noise. Ignore it. It's all a distraction. The more they try to twist the story, the more they'll hurt themselves in the end. Let them." Eleanor didn't answer immediately. She didn't need to. She could feel the weight of her decision in every gesture, every silent moment of triumph that came when people saw through the facade. They couldn't discredit her. They were only cementing her truth. A message from a reporter flashed on her screen, another headline ripe with the drama they'd manufactured. They wanted a statement. Eleanor glanced at the screen, the edges of her lips curling into a knowing smile. It was all playing out exactly as she had anticipated. She responded with a simple, measured text. "Tell them I have nothing to add." But the phone rang before the message could be sent. It was the media again, this time pressing for her own direct response. "Mrs. Harper, can we get a statement about your son's public comments?" the voice on the other end asked, trying to sound casual, but the tension was thick in every word. Eleanor's calm voice came through the receiver, composed and steady. "I'll be releasing a statement soon, but not today." The reporter stammered for a second, sensing the finality in Eleanor's voice. "Can you share your thoughts on the situation?" Eleanor exhaled slowly, allowing the silence to stretch before her next words. "I've already said everything that needs to be said," and with that, she ended the call. The weight of it all hung in the air between Dylan and Sophie, a tension thicker than the silken drapes in their penthouse. The world had turned upside down in a matter of days, and the consequences of their actions were beginning to show. Dylan was pacing again, running a hand through his hair for the third time in as many minutes. His phone buzzed constantly, texts from old business partners, press contacts, all saying the same thing. The will's airtight. No way around it. Sophie sat across from him on the couch, her hands shaking slightly as she held a glass of wine. The bottle sat uncorked on the table between them, but the alcohol did little to dull the growing anxiety on her face. "This is ridiculous, Dylan," she snapped, her voice cutting through the silence. "You were supposed to handle this. We were supposed to be a team, and now we're here, with nothing. You're letting her win. Dylan's gaze snapped to her, the anger in his eyes flaring like a sudden fire. I'm doing everything I can, Sophie. What do you want me to do? She's unmovable. Sophie's laugh was sharp and brittle. Well, maybe that's because you've been so easy to manipulate, Dylan. All this time, you thought she'd cave, that she'd soften for you. But she's too smart for that. Now look at us. Dylan's jaw tightened, his fingers gripping the edge of the table as he leaned in closer. Don't talk to me like I'm the one who messed this up. You wanted this life, Sophie. You wanted the money, the status, all of it. You're the one who pushed me to fight this hard. She stood up, anger flaring in her eyes. I didn't ask for this. I asked for you to handle it, not to fold at the first sign of a fight. I can't believe I trusted you. The accusation stung harder than anything Dylan had felt in years. His chest tightened, the weight of their crumbling relationship crashing down on him. He stood abruptly, stepping toward the window, his gaze lost in the lights of the city below. He needed a way out. He needed to find a way to salvage this, maybe alone. The thought hit him like a lightning bolt. He turned, grabbed his phone, and started scrolling through old contacts, friends from his younger days, people who had once looked up to him, who might still owe him a favor. The names rolled by: Derek, Kevin, Michael, people who had been happy to bask in his shine when things were good. But what about now? Now that he was nothing more than a man with an empty future. Hey man, Dylan's voice cracked slightly as he dialed. I know it's been a while, but I'm in a situation. Could use some help, financially. The conversation was a blur of promises and excuses. Nothing concrete, nothing firm. The more he heard, the more his stomach churned. These people weren't his friends. They were just like everyone else, using him when it suited them. Meanwhile, across town, Eleanor was doing what she did best: living. The weight of the legal battle was already behind her, and though the media buzzed with drama, she sat calmly in her bright, airy office, watching the sun filter through the large windows. The walls were lined with artwork she had commissioned, pieces by women artists whose work spoke to her on a level nothing else did. This was her space. She leaned back in her chair, sipping tea with a quiet smile. The relief of being free from the constant tug of her son's demands washed over her. Dylan's text messages, once a part of her daily routine, no longer held the same sway over her emotions. In fact, she had already moved on, investing in causes that mattered to her. Her latest project was a women's shelter for displaced families, one that would serve both as a refuge and as a resource for rebuilding lives. She had poured a portion of her resources into it, knowing it would give her the peace she had been craving for years. The house was quiet without Dylan and Sophie's constant drama. The space felt lighter, the air cleaner. Eleanor felt, for the first time in a long while, the space to breathe. But just as she began to relax fully into her new life, her phone buzzed again. Dylan's name flashed across the screen. A single message. I'm sorry. I'll fix this. Eleanor stared at the screen, her finger hovering over the keyboard. A pang of something, resentment, regret, flashed within her chest. But it was gone before it could settle. She didn't need him to fix anything. Without a word, she deleted the message. The weight of that single gesture, the decision to let go entirely, settled like a stone in her heart. But it wasn't sadness. It was finality. The courtroom was quieter this time, less hopeful, more resigned. The once vibrant energy that had filled the room with anticipation now felt flat, drained of color. Dylan, his face pale from the stress of the ongoing battle, sat at the plaintiff's table with Sophie beside him. Their lawyer, once confident, now looked uncertain, glancing nervously at the documents laid out before him. They had come here with one final hope, a desperate last stand against the fate they couldn't outrun. But Robert Daniels knew better. Eleanor sat in the same seat she had during the last round of hearings, calm, poised, unflinching. The cool air in the courtroom felt like a barrier between her and the chaos unfolding at the other side of the room. She looked almost serene, her fingers lightly tapping the armrest, her eyes only briefly flicking to Dylan and Sophie before returning to the legal proceedings. Robert, standing beside her, scanned the documents, flipping through the appeal Dylan had filed. The weight of his decision was already clear. He turned to Eleanor, his voice quiet but firm. "This appeal has no grounds, Eleanor. They're desperate. They can't change the outcome." Eleanor didn't respond immediately. The steady, rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall filled the space between them. Her face remained unreadable, a calm that had become second nature over the course of this battle. Robert continued, a slight edge of satisfaction in his voice. "It's done. You've won. This time, it's over for good." The words landed like a final blow to the tension that had been hanging in the air for so long. Eleanor nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. She wasn't celebrating, not yet. This moment, this finality, was the culmination of years of strength, of decisions made in silence. Across the room, Dylan and Sophie were discussing their options in hushed voices. Sophie's shoulders were slumped, her eyes red from sleepless nights spent plotting their next move. But Dylan's jaw was still set, stubborn defiance bubbling just beneath the surface. "We're not giving up yet," Dylan muttered, barely loud enough for his lawyer to hear. His lawyer paused, glancing at the pile of papers before them. "I'm afraid there's nothing left to do. This last-ditch effort to challenge the will is hopeless. Even if we find some technicality, it won't change the fact that she's outsmarted us." Dylan's frustration boiled over. "There has to be something. This isn't fair." Sophie looked at him, her voice quieter than usual. "Maybe it's time to accept it, Dylan." But before he could respond, a message arrived on Robert's phone, a quick ding that seemed to capture the end of an era. He read it quickly, his brow furrowing for a moment. Then he put his phone down with a sharp exhale. "Their lawyer is withdrawing," he said to Eleanor, his voice almost sounding victorious. "They're done." Dylan's lawyer stood up, walking over to them, his head hung low. "Mr. Harper, Mrs. Harper," he began, his voice uncharacteristically meek. "We've decided to withdraw from the case. There's no path forward, no strategy left. We're admitting defeat." The words felt surreal to Dylan. He didn't want to believe them. It was over. For the first time, the weight of his arrogance, his manipulations, his years of expecting to win without consequence, he was finally facing it all. Sophie's eyes flicked to him, pleading. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Please, can we just talk to her? She'll listen. I know she will." But Eleanor had already made her decision. She stood up slowly, the rustle of her tailored coat the only sound in the otherwise silent room. Her calmness, her unwavering resolve, was more powerful than anything Dylan and Sophie had ever expected. Sophie turned, desperate, looking for any glimmer of hope. "Eleanor, please, we were wrong. Just give us a chance. Let us make it right." Eleanor's voice cut through the air like a blade. "You lost the moment you tried to control me." Her words were measured, but they carried the weight of everything that had led them here. "There's no fixing what's been broken. You made your choices. Now you have to live with them." Sophie's face crumpled, but Dylan remained motionless, staring at Eleanor with a look that could have burned a hole through the room. He opened his mouth to say something, but the words never came. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, the last light of the day casting long shadows across the courtroom. For a moment, the world outside seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the inevitable. Eleanor turned to leave, her posture still dignified, her eyes fixed straight ahead. As she walked through the doors, Robert by her side, the weight of the world seemed to lift from her shoulders. But as she reached the lobby, her phone buzzed once more. She glanced at the screen. It was a text from Dylan. "I'm sorry, I'll fix this." The same message he had sent before, filled with regret, yet still tethered to the same misguided hope. Eleanor's fingers hovered over the screen. This time, she didn't hesitate. She deleted it without a second thought. The final gavel had come down. The legal battle was over, and with it, the last shred of Dylan and Sophie's grip on what they believed was their inheritance. The estate had been sealed, and Eleanor had won, not just the mansion, not just the wealth, but her right to live free from their manipulations. The media had made a spectacle of it, flashing headlines of their disinheritance, but Eleanor had been resolute in her silence. Her phone rang constantly. Journalists, lawyers, family, friends, all eager to congratulate her or weigh in on the aftermath. Eleanor didn't answer most of them, but when Robert called, she picked up. "It's done, Eleanor. It's final." His voice was warm, familiar, like an old friend who'd shared this weight for years. She smiled into the phone, a quiet satisfaction washing over her. It's more than final. It's liberation. She had donated a significant portion of the estate to a charity close to her heart, one that supported displaced women and children, a cause she'd always championed in the shadows of her business empire. With the weight of the inheritance lifted from her shoulders, Eleanor had found new purpose in helping others. It was a decision that not only gave her peace, but allowed her to reclaim the legacy she wanted to leave behind. One of integrity and compassion. The mansion still stood tall at the end of the long drive, but it no longer felt like a prison of expectations. The walls, once so full of tension, seemed to exhale with each passing day. Eleanor could breathe now. She walked the halls in peace, without the constant threat of her son's demands looming over her. The garden, meticulously cared for, was her sanctuary. Each rose bush a symbol of the time she'd nurtured herself, instead of feeding the insatiable neediness of those who had tried to control her. At family gatherings, the atmosphere was lighter. Friends who had once hesitated to cross her son's line now felt free to celebrate Eleanor's strength. Her closest confidants, Grace and Jessica, had been by her side through it all, supporting her decisions when it felt like the world was stacked against her. But while Eleanor basked in the clarity of her choices, Dylan and Sophie were spiraling. Their financial struggles deepened with each passing day, their lavish lifestyle crumbling beneath the weight of their ruined reputation. Dylan had tried to salvage his image by reaching out to old contacts, but the calls were met with cold silence. Sophie, once the glamorous partner in crime, had become increasingly bitter, her high-end designer gowns now gathering dust as the money that had fueled their life of luxury slowly evaporated. Dylan's eyes no longer shone with the arrogance of a man who thought he was untouchable. He walked the streets of Beverly Hills, his head low, the world now seeing him for what he truly was. A man who had squandered everything: family, opportunity, dignity. His phone buzzed constantly, but the messages he received were no longer filled with congratulations or offers of deals. Instead, they were reminders of his fall from grace, people pointing out the cracks in the life he once had. Sophie, desperate, had called him several times in the past week. Her voice was filled with venom and desperation, a stark contrast to the woman who had once commanded rooms with her charm. "You need to fix this, Dylan. We can't live like this. We can't keep pretending everything's fine." But there was no fixing it. Not anymore. Eleanor's new life had begun, and she was savoring every moment of it. She filled her time with art, with charity work, with quiet walks through her garden. The weight of her decision didn't feel like a burden. It felt like freedom. One morning, as Eleanor sipped tea on her terrace, the headline she had been waiting for finally came across her newsfeed. She glanced at it, a small smile playing at her lips. Beverly Hills woman evicts son, keeps her legacy. It was the perfect ending to a long, painful chapter. She hadn't just won, she had reshaped her future on her own terms. But the sense of closure didn't last long. As Eleanor leaned back in her chair, savoring the light warmth of the sun on her skin, a thought crossed her mind. Dylan and Sophie's downfall had just begun, and their desperate attempts to climb back up might bring something darker into her peaceful world. Eleanor's smile faded as she stared at the screen, her finger hovering over the phone. This story wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. The buzz of the media machines grew louder by the day, but it wasn't the sound of victory for Dylan and Sophie. It was the echo of their collapse. Dylan's attempts to salvage his reputation had started months ago. Public apologies, press conferences, and carefully worded Instagram posts. But none of it was working. His words no longer held the same weight they once did. The same cameras that once followed him around with adoration now scrutinized every faltering step he took. It was almost poetic. Every headline was an axe to his public image, each news outlet hammering in the final nails to the coffin of his carefully crafted life. Entitled "Son of Wealth Faces Public Backlash After Family Fallout," one article read. Another, more damning, Dylan Harper's fall from grace, from heir to exile. The words were no longer just words. They were the truth, peeling back layers of illusion. The world saw him for who he was, nothing more than a privileged man who had failed to hold on to everything he'd been handed. Sophie had disappeared from the public eye altogether. The once glamorous socialite, who had never hesitated to flaunt her wealth, now slinked into the shadows. No more red carpet appearances, no more flashy outfits. Instead, the whispers about her grew louder. The woman who sold her soul for a house of cards, the press called her. Dylan had tried to reach out to old contacts, big names, businessmen who'd once respected him, women who'd once fawned over his wealth, but none of them were taking his calls anymore. The distance between him and his past life widened, until even the phone's ringing tone felt like a mockery. Eleanor, meanwhile, stood still in the eye of the storm, the chaos swirling around her but never touching her. Robert Daniels, her lawyer, sat across from her one afternoon, the room bathed in the soft light of late afternoon. "It seems Dylan's finally facing reality," Robert said, his voice measured but with a trace of satisfaction. "He started paying off his debts. Slowly but surely, he's clearing out the financial mess he's been hiding." Eleanor set down her teacup, the warm steam rising from the surface like the quiet thoughts she had kept for so long. "Let him," she replied, her voice steady but carrying the weight of years of struggle. "I'm done." Her words, simple and final, carried more than just a release. They were a decision to let go completely. The burden she had been carrying, the one Dylan and Sophie had placed on her shoulders, had been released. For the first time in a long while, Eleanor felt truly free. The shackles of obligation had loosened, and in their place, she found peace. She spent the day with Grace, her old friend who had stood by her throughout the years, reflecting on the lessons life had taught her. They sat together in Eleanor's garden, the air thick with the scent of jasmine, the sound of rustling leaves filling the space between them. "I always thought it was about the money," Grace said quietly, her gaze fixed on the flowers blooming around them. "But it was never about that, was it?" Eleanor smiled softly, a quiet laugh escaping her lips. "No, it was never about that." Grace turned to her, eyes sharp with curiosity. "Then what was it about, Eleanor?" Eleanor took a deep breath, letting the silence settle before she answered. "It was about control. The illusion of it. The belief that we could hold on to something when the truth was that we never had it in the first place." The sun sank lower, casting long shadows across the lawn. The weight of years of decisions, of battles fought and lost, began to feel like a distant memory. Eleanor no longer had to explain herself. She no longer had to answer to anyone, least of all Dylan and Sophie. Instead, she began to focus on the future. There was a new project in the works, a nonprofit she had always dreamed of starting, one dedicated to helping women rebuild their lives after personal setbacks. It was time to shift her focus, to leave behind the scars of the past, and look forward to what truly mattered. The phone buzzed again, but this time, Eleanor ignored it. There were no more phone calls to answer, no more messages from people who thought they could pull her strings. She was carving a path for herself, one that wasn't dictated by the failures of her son or the manipulations of her past. As evening fell, a reporter called, one of the last to reach out. "Mrs. Harper," the voice on the other end said, "the story's out. What does the future hold for you?" Eleanor's eyes lingered on the horizon, watching the last rays of light fade into twilight. There was a moment of silence before she answered, her voice low but full of certainty. "You'll see," she said, and the finality of her words left no room for debate. Eleanor stood at the edge of the world, her hands gripping the railing as the plane soared over the glittering expanse of Paris below. The lights twinkled like 1,000 diamonds, far beneath the hum of the aircraft, the glow of the city reflecting the freedom Eleanor now felt. The world was no longer a battlefield. It was a place for discovery, for reinvention. It had been months since the legal battles, since Dylan's last desperate plea, since the weight of expectations had been lifted from her shoulders. She'd taken the time to travel, to rediscover herself, to unearth the parts of her that had been buried beneath years of sacrifice. The world felt vast now, full of possibilities, full of colors she hadn't seen before. She spent her days wandering through museums in Florence, watching the light spill over ancient sculptures like warm honey. She spent afternoons in cozy cafes in Paris, the rich scent of espresso mingling with the heady perfume of fresh croissants. Her life was hers again, simple, quiet, yet exhilarating. In London, she gave her first public speech at a charity gala for women's rights, speaking passionately about the importance of reclaiming one's own story. "It's never too late to start over," she told the audience, her voice steady and commanding. "You have the power to reshape your life at any moment. Never let anyone tell you it's too late." The room had been silent with respect, each word she spoke sinking in like a stone tossed into still water. When she finished, the applause had been thunderous, more than she could have ever imagined. For the first time in years, Eleanor felt like she was truly seen, truly heard. The whispers of the past, the betrayal, the hurt, the weight of her son's expectations had melted away, replaced by something far more meaningful. But even in the midst of her newfound freedom, the shadows of her old life occasionally crept in. Dylan called more frequently now, his voice softer, almost pleading. He'd reached out several times, first with apologies, then with promises to fix things, to make amends. But Eleanor had learned the hard way that words, no matter how sincere, could never undo the damage that had been done. One afternoon, while Eleanor was sorting through documents in her peaceful study, her phone buzzed with a text from Dylan. "I'm sorry, I never should have treated you that way. Please let me make it right." Her fingers hovered over the screen. She had already made her decision long ago. She responded with the same unwavering clarity she had embraced for months. "You don't get to walk back in after everything you've done." There was no reply. There would be no more chances. The door she had closed on Dylan had been locked from the inside, and it was never going to be opened again. Instead, Eleanor turned her focus to the future, to the dreams that had remained dormant for so long. She had always been captivated by art, by the stories it told, by the emotions it captured. Now, she was determined to create a space for other women whose voices had been suppressed by history. She opened an art gallery, dedicated entirely to female artists, showcasing their work in a way that had never been done before. The gallery quickly became a sanctuary for expression, a haven for women who had stories to tell through their paintbrushes, their sculptures, their photography. Eleanor took joy in watching the women thrive, knowing that she was part of something bigger than herself, part of a movement that would outlast any of her personal battles. Her evenings were spent with friends, Grace, Jessica, and others who had supported her along the way. They would laugh over wine, reminisce about the past, and talk about the future. Eleanor had come to understand that the people who truly mattered were the ones who had never asked anything of her, who had stood by her when the rest of the world had turned away. One late afternoon, as she sat in her garden, a reporter approached her, notebook in hand. She had been sitting in the soft sunlight, the scent of jasmine heavy in the air, watching the birds flit between the trees. The reporter's voice broke the silence, sharp and unexpected. "Mrs. Harper," he asked, his tone respectful but curious. "You've rebuilt your life, left behind the legacy of a painful past. What do you want to be remembered for?" The question lingered in the air, hanging like the scent of the roses blooming around her. Eleanor paused, the answer coming to her as naturally as breathing. She had lived for others for so long, driven by the expectations of her family and society, but now she could say what mattered most. With a slight smile, she looked at the reporter, her gaze clear and unwavering. "I want to be remembered for creating a space where people could be free, a place where women could stand tall, tell their stories, and leave their mark on the world." The reporter scribbled something down, nodding in approval. But Eleanor's mind was already far ahead, her thoughts drifting toward the future. Her life, once defined by others, was now a canvas she was painting with bold strokes of independence. Dylan and Sophie had become nothing but echoes in Eleanor's life. Their once demanding presence had faded, and with it, the stress and manipulation they had brought into her world. No more phone calls, no more texts begging for another chance. The press had lost interest in the drama, and Eleanor could finally breathe, without the constant weight of their expectations. Her house stood as a quiet testament to the life she had rebuilt, a life free from the strain of their influence. The mansion, once a symbol of her entrapment, was now a sanctuary. The rooms that had been filled with tension were now filled with peace. She walked the halls with ease, savoring the stillness, her footsteps echoing softly against the marble floors. Outside, her garden bloomed, vibrant colors splashing against the green, the air fragrant with the scent of jasmine and rose. The world outside her gates had nothing to offer her anymore. Everything she needed was here. Eleanor had spent the years focusing on herself, rediscovering her passions and giving them life. She had always loved art, but it had been a distant dream, lost in the shuffle of family obligations and business pressures. Now she spent her days creating and curating, channeling her energy into a new project, an art gallery dedicated to female artists. It was a space that celebrated the stories and voices of women who had long been overlooked in the art world. Every piece, every exhibit, was a reflection of the strength she had discovered within herself. The gallery flourished, growing into something bigger than she'd ever imagined. People came from all over to see the exhibits, to witness the work of artists who had fought to be heard. Eleanor spoke at events, sharing her story with others, encouraging them to take control of their lives, to fight for their voices. Her words inspired many, and the ripple effect was clear in the countless messages she received from people thanking her for showing them that it was possible to rebuild, to live authentically. But while Eleanor thrived, Dylan and Sophie struggled. Dylan, still desperately clinging to his old ways, tried to reconnect with old business partners, but they turned their backs on him. The lavish lifestyle he had once enjoyed was now a distant memory. Sophie, too, was feeling the weight of their failure. She had disappeared from the public eye, no longer the glamorous figure she had once been. They were both caught in the fallout of their own actions, their attempts to climb back up falling flat with every failed call, every door that remained closed. Meanwhile, Eleanor's life was nothing but calm. Her garden, her gallery, her quiet days spent reading or visiting the people who mattered most. These were the things that brought her peace. The noise of the world, of Dylan and Sophie's failures, no longer had a hold on her. Then one day, Dylan texted her again. "I'm sorry, I'll fix this." She looked at the message for a moment, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. It wasn't the first time he'd tried to reconnect, but this time, Eleanor was unmoved. She had given him more chances than he deserved, and she knew now that there was no going back. She deleted the message without hesitation. There was nothing left to fix. Dylan's story was no longer her burden to carry. Eleanor's peace was no longer tied to her past, and she had no intention of letting it back into her life. One evening, as she sat in her garden, the evening air cooling with the setting sun, a reporter approached her. The sound of his footsteps in the gravel path broke the quiet. But Eleanor didn't look up from the flowers she was tending. "Mrs. Harper," the reporter began, his tone respectful but probing, "you've been through so much. What do you want to be remembered for?" Eleanor paused, taking a slow breath. She looked up at the sky, the colors of the sunset painting the world in soft hues of pink and orange. The question hung in the air like the scent of jasmine in the breeze. She had already made her choice, and the answer came easily now. "I want to be remembered for creating a space where people can be free," she said, her voice steady, unshakable. "A place where women can stand tall, tell their stories, and leave their mark on the world." The reporter scribbled quickly in his notebook, nodding thoughtfully, but Eleanor's gaze remained fixed on the horizon, the weight of her past behind her, and the future laid out before her. Her story was hers, and no one would take that from her again.